everybody, welcome to the Friday episode of the Dobbin Bandits. It is Orrin, and we have a wonderful, wonderful episode today. We have Mr. Tom Mason joining us. You might know Tom as the creator of Dinosaurs For Hire, but he's also one of the founders of Malibu Comics. Really interesting to find out the independent comic scene, how it all sort of came together in the 80s. And, Tom was right there in the middle of it, and he saw how it grew and how it sort of, became an entity unto itself. I think you're really going to love this episode. I know I love talking to him about it. So without further ado, Mr. Tom Mason. Tom Mason joining us. Sir, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for asking me to come on.
Not a problem. So let's go to the very start. How do you
Uh,
discover comics?
how did I discover comics?
Mhm.
I think because I'm an old guy.
Right.
Um, I think for my generation, I discovered them through, this might seem weird, but I discovered them through my parents
Okay.
because I was little, and when I would be sick from school or whatever, and they would call in my prescription to the pharmacy, one of my parents would go to the pharmacy, pick up the medication or whatever, and they'd cruise by the rack and just grab comics. And because my parents didn't know anything about comics, they would just grab what they had heard of from TV or whatever. So I would get Superman or Batman or titles that had Superman or Batman in them, like World's Finest or Justice League or whatever.
Right.
And so I would get that stuff, and they'd come back from the drugstore with like 6 or 8 comics designed to keep me in bed and shut me up for the day. And so that I came to I'm surprised I didn't have some kind of mental illness because I came to look forward to being sick. It's like, oh great, I've got the flu. That means I'm getting some comics today. And so that that so then that grew into, well, I like these. I would like to get them when I'm not sick. So how can I, so then of course it's, well, I got to get money. Then I got to get away to the store on my own. And so that just sort of snowballed one thing after another. Then, like everybody else of that generation, they're in 7-Elevens and convenience stores and drugstores and grocery stores at that time. And so you could pretty much find what you were looking for.
How
So,
was the decision made for you to put this into a career?
uh, well, it wasn't. So I stumbled. I This will just make people angry. I stumbled into this by accident. I know that people, I meet people on the convention circuit or online or whatever, and they're like, I got to break into comics, man. I got to do this. I got to do that. How can I, I got to show my portfolio to this guy. I got to meet the editors. I got to do this. I got whatever. It's like, I just stumbled into it, and in a stupid way. I was living in Stamford, Connecticut, um, at the same time, at the same city where Fantagraphics Books had their offices, and Fantagraphics needed an art director, someone to come in and do paste up. I knew the guys at Fantagraphics because all my friends and stuff, we all sort of hung out together socially, not as comic book people, but just as people in the same town. And They needed an art director. I had done art directing and paste up and production on my college newspaper, so I had some samples, and you know, they didn't really have a second option, so I sort of won by that. And then I became an art director, but at the time it didn't feel like I'd broken into comics. It just felt like, oh, I got a job. I can pay my rent. I can do that other stuff. And then it sort of grew into, oh, wait, because I was seeing original art come in from Dan Clowes and the Brothers Hernandez, and Gil Kane would draw. Fantagraphics moved out to Southern California, and they brought me along. Um, and so that sort of changed everything because then I stayed at Fantagraphics for another 2 years, and I met uh, one of the Fantagraphics guys was Dave Olbrich, who had come out to join the company. They had hired him as like a marketing guy and the editor of Amazing Heroes, and Dave and I became really good friends. And then Dave left because he got a better job. That that bastard. Um, and then about a year later, we were still hanging out together. And about a year after that, Dave said, "Hey, look, I got a guy who's going to back me starting a comic book company. Do you want in?" And I said, "Well, yes, because I would like a better job, and I would like to be at the start of something that sounded fun." And the thing is, when you're in, maybe you've experienced this too. The thing is, when you're in a startup company, it's going to be long hours, and a lot going on. So you might as well be with some people that you can stand, that you like to be around, because you're going to be looking at them 8, 10 hours a day. Um, so that was it. I got invited to join Fantagraphics, and then I got invited to move to California, and then I got invited to join what became Malibu Comics. So I just sort of blundered my way into it without really any sort of, drive behind, oh, I got to get into comics.
So where does Dinosaurs for Hire fit into that timeline?
Oh, well, okay. Now we're going way. Okay, so the I was friends with Jan Sternad, and he'd come out to California as well. He decided to leave Kansas City, which God bless him for that because he is not made for Kansas City. He's a California guy. So he came out to California too, and I met him and we hung out together. And he was starting up a company called Mad Dog Graphics to publish stuff that he liked, independent stuff. And a mutual friend of ours, a guy named Mike Valerio, had came up with like the germ of an idea called Elvis Undercover,
Mhm.
which is basically what if there's a photo of Nixon shaking Elvis Presley's hand when Elvis Presley's like high as a kite,
Yeah.
and Nixon made him an honorary sheriff.
Mhm.
And the joke was, from Mike's perspective, well, what if Elvis took that seriously?
Mhm.
And what if in between tours and in between eating food and shooting TVs or whatever, he felt like he was a sheriff and he would go out and he would solve crimes? And that was a hysterical idea. Mike didn't want to develop it any further than that. Like it was just a joke that he could talk about with friends.
Right.
And Jan wanted to make it into a comic. And so I pitched my hand in again, stumbled into it and said, "Oh, I'll write this." Um, and Jan sat down with me and I did a draft of the script, and then Jan sat down with me and basically took me to writer school, which is, because he'd written and published his own comics. He'd done a lot of stuff for Warren Comics. He had worked for Marvel. He'd worked for DC, and so he knew stuff. And so he schooled me in, well, this is how you stage a page. This is how you do this. This is everything you've done wrong. Now fix it. So I did another draft of the script, and we were ready to go. We had an artist, a guy named Don Lomax, who did some pages,
Mhm.
and Jan was ready to solicit it, and then uh, uh, he got cold feet because he thought the Elvis people are basically as sue happy as Disney people, and so I don't blame Jan because we're all independent small guys. We
Right.
could easily be squashed by the threat of anything. So we put it on hold, and then like a year later, uh, Dave and I had launched Malibu Comics,
Okay.
and we were looking around for stuff to solicit for upcoming. We always tried to plan out 6 months in advance, and we're always trying to think of what else do we have, and we didn't really have anything. What could we do? And I said, well, I've got this Elvis Undercover script that I've already written that we could do something with. And Dave said the same thing that Jan said. Well, I don't want to get the Elvis people mad at us. Let's not do that. And I said, well, I could change the characters. I mean, the structure is still fairly sound, and I could change the character into something else. And it was Dave Obridge who said, make it a dinosaur. So again, I stumbled into this with the help of a friend who just said, you should take your stupid idea and make it stupider. We'll make, and so I took the character of Elvis and I made him into three different dinosaurs because
Mhm.
I thought that was funnier. And then that became Dinosaurs for Hire. So, once again, I anger the internet because I stumble into these things and I seize the opportunity, but I didn't work hard for it in the same way that I've seen other people work hard.
The luckiest man in comics.
I essentially yes. And so I did. So because they get asked this all the time. It's like, well, how did you break into comics, Mr. Mason? It's like, oh, you don't want to hear that story. That's just gonna make you so mad.
So with dinosaurs, did you have like an arc in mind, a starting point and an end point, or were you just kind of going issue after issue was just going to be something a little different and just keep it
With
rolling?
Yeah, so here's the thing is that I thought it was gonna be like a one-shot joke.
Right.
Like I thought, okay, you'll get it. Dinosaurs as private eyes working for the government. That's it. There's nothing you could do.
Right.
And then it turns out, and I don't know if you've heard this or not, but comics come out every month.
Huh.
And so and the first issue sold pretty well, and then we were like, well, you should do a second one, and then you should do a third one. It was like I only had the one script already written. So
Right.
then I had to sit down and I had to figure out retroactively what I had done, how had I painted myself into a corner where I could do this for 9 issues. And I thought, well, I'll just pick a subject each issue and I'll just make fun of it in a way that incorporates it into the plot without devolving into like Mad, because I didn't want to do Mad Magazine. I didn't want to do that,
Right.
but because I still wanted to do, because the fun of it is watching dinosaurs interact with people and shoot things. The parody aspect isn't necessarily, it's a selling tool, but it's not really interesting to me.
Right.
It's more like the catalyst for how can I get these guys to rampage. And so each month, and I was still working a full-time job at the comic book company. So each month I would have to sit down and sort of fly by the seat of my pants to figure out what I was doing.
When the
So,
success hit, when you're told, hey, this sold pretty well, is there a nervousness on your part, like, okay, can I keep doing this?
oh no, because the rush, and I don't say that out of ego. It's like, oh, I got this. It's like, no, I didn't. It's like there's no time to think about that. It's like the issue. Comic books are this massive engine that eats its young every single month, and it's like, well, you just got to do it. Like there's no, you don't have time for writer's block. You don't have time for self-doubt. You don't have time for any sort of hand-wringing. Like there's no Peter Parker, Steve Ditko Spider-Man where it's like, oh, am I worthy? It's like, no, I got 28 days. So I gotta write at least a page a day and then allow for somebody else to read it. And so that's, there's no time.
Makes sense. Now, jumping to Malibu, what was the first step for you in your mind of, okay, if we're going to start this company, what's the first thing we need to do?
Oh my God. I wish it had been planned out like that. So the thing is that when Dave asked me to join,
Mhm.
he had already done a lot of preliminary work.
Okay.
So he had already contracted the first books. So he had gotten Ari Jones and Butch Burcham to agree for Dark Wolf. He had gotten Dennis Pimple and Norm Dwyer on Libby Ellis. He had gotten Mike Valerio to do Stealth Force, and he had negotiated with Gerard Jones and Will Jacobs to do The Trouble with Girls. So there were things already locked in,
Okay.
and the key stuff for us was at that time was we wanted to do just creator owned stuff. Like that was the key. And because we had both worked at Fantagraphics,
Mhm.
which is all creator owned stuff, and we were both friends with Dean Mulaney at the time who ran Eclipse, and that was uh, mostly creator owned stuff. And it's because the thing is, if you're not paying guys DC and Marvel money up front, you got to give them you just can't own their stuff. It doesn't make any sense. And even if you are paying the Marvel and DC money, you probably shouldn't own their stuff. Um, so I think it just so that was the key. And the other thing was let's not try to pay people late. Let's try to pay people what even if it's a small amount, let's pay them what we say we're going to pay them and do it on time because these guys are just like us. They're living in apartments and trying to make their rent, and let's not hold them out. So those are like the two. I know those don't sound like magic beans, but those are like the two things that they came from Dave Oberich, and those were the things that were really sort of important early on. And then it's just like, can we find the people?
Right.
Because what we found out early on is we thought because Dark Wolf and Libby Ellis were prepackaged by the creators. We thought, oh, that's easy. We just don't. All we have to do is read it. We don't have to traffic a book or anything. But it turns out it's hard to find those guys. It's hard to find people who can do a book from start to finish on their own. So then we started looking at pitches from writers for concepts, and then trying to find artists, and then trying to, the hardest part for us was finding a letterer
Oh, really?
because finding a really good letterer who is up to comic book standards was really difficult for an independent publisher.
Were there specific titles and not titles, but genres you were looking for as far as books went? What, did you just want to stick with, what was popular with
Well,
superheroes, or were you open to just about anything?
well, the thing is that the only mindset we had, well, there are two things. One is that we didn't want to do superheroes,
Okay.
even like a fresh hot take on superheroes, because it was already a field that was being mined by others.
Mhm.
And so what are you going to say? It's like, well, he's like Batman, but he's different. Oh, he's like Captain America, but he's different. It's like, well, no, no one, I don't think anybody believes that really. You
Mhm.
should just go and read Batman or Captain America. And the other was could we sell it?
Right.
Given given the publishing engine that we have, uh, and the fact that the direct market eats a book every 28 days, can can we get it out on time and will it sell?
Right.
Because a lot of our stuff was well, two things. One is you want to keep the engine going, so you want to keep the company afloat,
Mhm.
but also there's a duty to the creator of we're paying you in advance against royalties. Can we get it to a point where you get a back end payment? And so there's a lot of and we had Dave was really great at charts and graphs and Excel spreadsheets and trying to figure out here's the cost per unit, here's how much it costs to print, here's what the talent costs are, and here's the profit and here's the split. And so you could just look at that and you would know right away, well, here's what we got.
What was your stance on bringing in licensed properties to help give some name recognition? And then, because I've spoken to a few, Jim Shooter and a few other folks, and they said licensed
Right.
properties help because if they see this book, like, oh, I'm familiar with this. Oh, this
Right.
company also puts out this book. Let me try it out as well.
What you find, I mean, I think that might be true at Marvel and DC,
Right.
but I think what you'll find is like there are no there are no line wide readers for independent comics,
Right.
in my experience. You got at best you'll get a customer who might pick up one or two from a similar genre that they're into, but they're not going to go line wide like they would at DC or Marvel, certainly in those days. And so what we'd hope to do is just drive people to the books.
Mhm.
And so um, if you publish a Planet of the Apes book, maybe they'll pick up one other one. Or more importantly, maybe a retailer will see, oh, they've got Planet of the Apes now. I should take a harder look at what they're doing and see if there's something else I could put in my order form. And so that's what we found is it gave us sort of a higher status in in the pond. We just became a bigger frog. And so which is not the best analogy, I guess. But so it brought attention and it gave us because the thing again about the direct market is you need some sort of news every month to get people excited. So it gave us news. So it's not nobody cares about the third issue of something or the second issue of something. They always care about the first issue of something and know if that first issue is Planet of the Apes or Star Trek or Alien Nation or Terminator or whatever. Now you've got some life in the cycle.
Was the mentality that you guys had, we are competition with or an alternative to DC and Marvel?
We didn't really care.
Okay.
Um, so because we thought of ourselves as independent, and we thought the uh, we talked to a bunch of retailers. We knew a lot of retailers in person, and the thing is that there's spillover from Marvel and DC where those kinds of buyers are looking for something else on occasion, but they will only like if DC stops publishing tomorrow,
Mhm.
those DC people are not going to rush out and just buy your books
Right.
because they need comics. That doesn't work that way. And so we never felt like at most we would get like maybe the spillover people
Mhm.
who were, sort of indie curious.
Right.
So we never saw whatever Marvel or DC didn't interest us. What did interest us is that we would look for there used to be a thing called a skip week where
Okay.
Marvel or DC would take a week off
Mhm.
and we would figure out way in advance when that skip week was going to be and we would try to ship our stuff that week
Right.
um, to fill that gap. And sometimes that worked, and sometimes that didn't. But that was the way we sort of uh, try to position ourselves. But we would pay a great deal of attention to how DC and Marvel marketed their stuff,
Right.
like what gimmicks they're using, what tricks they're using, what promotional opportunities they're having, and how they're interacting with retailers and what they're doing for retailers and fans and how they're delivering on the promise. We paid huge amounts of attention to them as that is competition, but like, well, if that idea works, we should steal that.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
What I mean, we're talking about the before the internet. How
right.
are you getting the word out to folks that your books are available? Get retailers to become interested in bringing them in. What was your strategy as to,
So
just
we
spreading
had
the word?
we had two things. We had two things. We had several things. One is we advertised.
Mhm.
So we had a regular page in the Comics Buyer's Guide. We supported Comic Shop News. We would buy stuff in the Diamond and Capital City catalogs.
Mhm.
We would go to all the trade shows that the distributors used to have in the golden era when people had money. And we would go, so we would do that. We would try to meet as many retailers as possible,
Mhm.
and just it was never we were never the hard sellers.
Okay.
We were always guys. We always wanted to be like guys you'd have a beer with. And so, because that's essentially, we are the guys you'd want to have a beer with, more or less. And so we're not those hard driving suit site type salesmen that you see like used car dealers or whatever. We don't want to be that guy. And so we'd meet as many retailers as we could, and we would be like open to fans at conventions. Like you could, if you were a fan of our stuff, you could find one of us at a show and we would chat with you. And if you called us on the telephone, there's somebody that would talk to you.
Right.
And so we were just sort of open and willing. And if you wrote us a letter, we would send you comics and posters and pins and stuff in response. And so that we had the short game of the advertising and the promotional stuff, and then we had the long game of we're just going to try to capture these people and make them aware that they may, I mean, they're not going to buy 10 books from us. They might buy just one title.
Mhm.
But if we capture them, what can we do to hold on to them? And so we just build.
Was there a moment in time where you said, this is working? Like, okay, this is getting traction. We're starting to get, a foothold in the industry.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Because the the real answer is during the black and white days, um, there were a limited number of retailers that would put independent comics in their store because there's not as a criticism of them, there's just a limited space and everything's non-returnable. So it's an investment on their part. They got to buy what they can sell. Um, and then we always had, um, I used to call it the magic number, where Scott Rosenberg would sit down with the finances every month and he would just say, okay, in our next solicitation, we need books that will bring us to this income level. And so we were always trying to hit that magic number every month. And how could we do it without, killing ourselves, without working 80 hours a week?
Mhm.
And so we were basically chasing the magic number constantly and really didn't have time to sit back and go, well, I guess we made it because we only we only really made it for that period of time, and then the new magic number would come out. And then so we never really sort of the difference was I think when the image guys came on.
Okay.
But I'm jumping ahead in the history, but once the image guys came on, it was like, oh, this is good for us. This is really good. It's great for them and it's good for us.
Yeah, I want to jump to that in a second, but um, just going back, if you guys had heard like, oh, so and so big name has a project they want to do outside of DC and Marvel, does it become a bidding war between like you guys, maybe first Eclipse, other books to try to get these people on board? Or did folks just kind of come to you and say, listen, I like what you're doing. I'd like to, put this out with you guys.
Most just came to us
Okay.
and said, like we would always put the bug in somebody's ear.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, we're open because if Walter Simonson had a project, you'd be a fool not to say, sure, Walter, we'll take a look.
Right.
And so we were always looking for that. And we were always looking for books that creators had packaged, thinking that Marvel or DC was going to take it on as maybe a creator-owned title,
Right.
and then somehow they didn't. Like I know when Archie Goodwin left Epic, it sort of there was a lot of titles that sort of got lost in that shuffle that could have been used. And when DC changed the contracts for Vertigo, there were some of those titles
Mhm.
that we were sniffing around. And I know that I think it was Ostrander and Tom Mandrake had, I know it's a Michigan, Dan Michigan and Tom Mandrake had a project that they've been shopping around for a while, and and Michigan's a great guy. I don't know the artist, I don't know Mandrake well, but I know Michigan is just great, gregarious, fun guy that you'd want to write with, you'd want to work with him. And so we were sniffing around that, but a lot of times there's a disconnect between what a professional, even in like if you tell the creator, you're going to own everything. We just want to rent it for a little while. There's still the disconnect in the money for what that value has to an independent publisher versus what that value has to DC or Marvel. So
You
sometimes we could make that deal work and sometimes not.
were you strictly focused on books, or did you think if something really becomes a hit, maybe we're talking about toys, maybe we're talking about t-shirts, other things like that?
Well, in so when Malibu was doing the black and white titles,
Mhm.
we didn't own anything,
Right,
so we didn't care.
right.
It never we were we were still looking at that magic number, and we would because the so here's the funny thing is that I mean we were a Southern California based comic book company, and when word got out that there was a comic book company in Southern California at that time, we would occasionally get calls from a movie studio or a producer looking for something. Hey, I'd like to come up and talk to you about your stuff, kid. Um, and the first question they would always ask, and again, this is right around the time of the first Batman movie, the Michael Keaton, Tim Burton one.
Mhm.
The first question they would always ask is, well, how many copies did it sell? And because they had this magic figure in their head, which is, well, if it sold 1 million copies, that means 1 million people at the box office paying $15 a ticket. Now I got $15 million. Well, it doesn't work like that. Um, and so we would tell them, and the phone call would basically go, yeah, I'm interested in this title. How many copies did it sell? Well, we sold 6,000 copies of it. Hello? Hello?
Yeah,
Hello? Are you still there? And so they weren't they weren't interested.
right.
And so we came to view the Hollywood people as like, a circus. Where it's like, yeah, well, it's fun to take their calls and it's fun to listen to them and see what kind of BS they're going to sprout. But once they hear the sales figures, they're gonna chump out.
Yeah.
So
So we mentioned before, Image Comics starts to come together. All these talents are they want to put out their own stuff. Uh,
yeah.
what's the first phone call you get from them?
Oh, so here's the thing is that so again this goes back to Dave Olbrich.
Mhm.
So Dave Olbrich knew Rob Liefeld before Rob Liefeld was Rob Liefeld.
Right.
And so Dave and Rob had met when Rob was doing Teen Titans or Hawk and Dove for DC. They became, I wouldn't say they were buddies, but
Right.
they became, phone call friends. And they'd see each other at conventions. They would chat on the phone, a couple times a month or whatever. And Rob would do the occasional guest cover for us as a favor to Dave. And that would become like it would become one of those little boostable things that you could promote because, hey, it's a Rob Liefeld cover. Remember him from Hawk and Dove or whatever.
Mhm.
And so Dave and Rob were always on good terms. And then Rob had gotten, I don't want to say pissed, but I'm going to say pissed. He'd gotten pissed at Marvel or DC
Mhm.
and he wanted to do a comic book called Exterminators. And he wanted to put an ad in the buyer's guide laying his claim to the title Exterminators. And he called up Dave and he said, Dave, can you guys design an ad for me? I'll send you all the stuff. So he sent the logo, he sent the art or whatever. We designed the CBG ad for him.
Mhm.
And um, it saw print, I think, in the Comics Buyer's Guide. And then I think Rob dropped it because he got a better deal at Marvel to do something else, whatever. Anyway, it was dropped, but that was a favor that we did for Rob, just for fun.
Mhm.
And that sort of cemented his relationship with Dave, not necessarily the company, but with Dave. And so when Rob was one of the spearheads of, I always get this wrong, and somebody always jumps on me as to how Image started and who did what and who's involved, whatever. So I'm sort of generic about this, because when Rob was one of the spokespeople for starting up Image,
Right.
His call was to Dave. Hey, listen, would you guys, I'm going to talk to you about some very vague stuff. And if some of this vague stuff goes forward, you'll be interested in taking a look at some of our vague stuff.
Right.
And Dave said, yeah, absolutely. We'll do that. And the guys shopped the Image deal to Dark Horse. They pitched it to Marvel a couple of times. I'm sure they went to DC with it, and everybody just said no. And we were the only guys that said, "Oh, absolutely, we'd be foolish not to take that," because the deal was not something a big corporation would do, which is it's creator-owned stuff. Individual creators own their individual stuff, so there's no company per se, and it's a 90-10 split. So basically, after agreed upon expenses, an Image guy gets 90% of the take, and Malibu would get 10% of the take. And a lot of guys would not take that deal. We ran the Excel spreadsheet and we said, well, you bet we'll take that deal. So,
Did it sound like a big undertaking because you had so many, big names and they had these plans and ideas? Or were you guys confident you had what it took to get everything out there to the public?
well, here's the great thing is that we were not editorial in control.
Right.
So the content stuff wasn't our concern.
Gotcha.
We knew we knew from all the guys, we talked to the guys as a group a couple times, and we knew they weren't going to do anything weird. Like
Right.
it wasn't this some kind of thing where they had these erotic dream comics that they wanted to publish, no one would publish, and now that's what they were going to do. They were going to do what they do, which is superhero stuff.
Right.
So we didn't have any concerns about content, and we didn't have any concerns about the professionalism of the book. We knew that they would deliver what they deliver because they
Mhm.
already had the reputations. So we just had to plug them into the engine that pre-existed us, that pre-existed them, which is promotable. Can we promote? Can we get it out to the word out to the retailers? Can we get the word out to the press? And can we handle printing 1 million comics through our printer? And so those are more logistical concerns
Mhm.
than traditional editorial concerns because we
Once
didn't we didn't interfere with content in any way. Those guys ran it.
once it took off and it exploded, are you getting more and more calls from different creators and different folks who want to be part of Malibu?
So here's what you get when that happens, or at least here's what we got.
Mhm.
Um, so we would get phone calls from people who didn't understand the Image deal,
Mhm.
and a lot of creators were like, well, "We know you. Why didn't you invite us?" It's like, well, it's not our party to invite you. Here's how this works. It's Rob and Jim and Todd and Eric and those guys, and if you know them, then that's how you get in. You can call me all day long. I can't do anything for you. So we got those calls, and then we got retail calls from retailers who were like, how, because I mean, those guys were exciting at the time. I was like, how can we get in on this? We've never ordered Malibu Comics before. Where are you in the catalog? How can we get some of these things? We want a piece of this action. So there's that. So suddenly more stores were carrying Malibu product just to get the Image product.
Mhm.
Um, we were getting a lot of press calls, both from industry press, but also outside press. So the Hollywood Reporter is calling up, the Los Angeles Times is calling up, Wall Street Journal is calling up, all those people that would never call us before are suddenly calling us. And so um, then we would get fans, like fans who'd heard about it, started to call the office. And then we had to have, I guess we're going to need a receptionist now because somebody's got to field all these calls and who's going to be the Image calling person. And so there's a lot of stuff that you don't count on. And then you have to have the um the printer. You have to tell the printer, look, we got orders for 750,000 copies of this comic. They want it on this paper. They want it on this schedule. What I mean, you can't just have if we hadn't had a relationship with printers, with multiple printers, we wouldn't have been able to deliver the goods. So
Looking back now, because I mean, a lot's been made of it, and there's documentaries, there's da 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 da. From your
oh yeah.
perspective solely, phase one of Image, not
Yes.
not where we are now, but that initial phase.
Yeah.
looking back now, was it handled the best it could have been? Because it sort of seems
I
like after a while it imploded a bit because of late books and infighting and this and that.
Yeah. So I think the chaos was managed as well as can be expected because there's seven guys with seven different personalities with seven different ideas of what they wanted to do who are also mad at Marvel and who are trying to prove themselves. And that's sort of it's like, are you a fan of old Popeye cartoons?
Sure.
Whenever you see Popeye and Olive Oyl dancing, like from the waist up, they look normal.
Yeah.
And then from the waist down, you see like 3,000 feet all going at crazy. Like, yeah, it's sort of like that, where it's like, the books come out, they still look like great comic books or whatever, but there's a lot of chaos going on behind the scenes as everyone's trying to jockey for position.
Mhm.
Because the Image guys were hugely competitive
Right.
and they each wanted to outdo each other and they each wanted to do, well, if he got a cover, a special cover, I want a special cover. And if he got foil, I want foil. And if he got foil, I want the next best thing and whatever. So there's a lot of that going on. And I think it's like managing, it's like trying to make a movie with seven big movie stars. It's like how, the fact that the movie gets made at all is really the best outcome that you could hope for. So I think the what I found interesting about the Image years,
Mhm.
about the Image beginnings, is that the number of excitable new fans that I saw stepping in. It's like the so you can say, and I've heard all the criticisms of the Image guys, which said the books are late or Rob can't draw feet or whatever, all that stuff. Fine. To me, none of that matters because what I saw at conventions, what I saw on the phone, what I saw in the orders, is I saw a lot of new people excited about comics who were not excited about. I mean, these weren't Marvel and DC people who were upset and running to Image. These were new guys, new people coming in and plunking down their money. And you don't get that now.
I was going to say, I've asked people this before. I was 13, 14 years old at the time, and we were lining up. I mean, people we didn't know, we were all talking about, oh, we got to get Youngblood #1. Oh, dude, did you see
Yeah.
Wildcats? And when they would come to stores, I remember they went to the Wizard store here in Nanuet, which is near where I grew up,
Yeah.
and there's lines around the block. It was like the Beatles
Yeah.
showed up. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think that excitement's ever going to come back to comics. I don't think we're going to be running
No.
out so excited to do this, or, just treating it as if this is a major event in our lives.
Right. Because I was at the launch party for Youngblood #1 at Golden Apple Comics on Melrose in Los Angeles. And they had Rob had the line, and this was Rob himself, not the Image guys, just Rob had the line out the door.
Yeah.
And Golden Apple had a couple of security guys. I believe there was a helicopter flying over because Melrose doesn't really have like 500 people on the street at one time.
Right.
And so, it's the kind of thing that um, you kind of wish there was another thing coming
Mhm.
that could do that.
Yeah.
But all the pieces were sort of in perfect balance at that time.
Right.
And I wish, I wish at this point now disgruntled Image creators would quit and start their own, non-Image thing, and so there could be that kind of excitement again. But there just isn't.
You guys then follow that up with Ultraverse, which to me kind of felt like you guys putting your foot down and saying,
Yes,
guess what? Malibu can play in this ballpark too.
yes,
Because you had a lot of great talents. I mean, you guys hit the market with a lot of books,
yes.
all in a rapid succession. Uh, Talk to me a little bit about the planning phase for that and what did you want the end game to be?
So the planning phase came in. There was so the Image guys left
Mhm.
and went out on their own because in their minds, they had figured out they'd learned enough,
Right.
and they didn't. And a couple of them didn't want to give up that 10%, which is fine. It's a business deal. It's the way it goes,
Right.
and they could walk at any time, and so that's that. And so then we met a guy named Bob Jacob, and Bob Jacob had a company called Acme Interactive that made video games.
Mhm.
And Bob Jacob is this sort of bigger than life, blustery, full of himself, big idea kind of guy. And his dream, his vision was that we would merge the interactive company that he had with our comic book company And we would basically create this dream company where it's basically two things at once. Video games are hot, comic books are hot, will be a thing. But in order to do that, and in order to make video games out of our comics, we needed to have comics to do that and comics that we own. So we're going to make corporate comics. So that was the decision to make corporate comics was to basically go into the bigger business of holding on to our own licenses, moving into video games, which at that time were, predicted to be bigger than the movies, and then move into movies and TV shows and toys and that kind of thing. And so that's, but you can't do any of that unless you own everything and control everything. And so then it became, well, how do you pitch? If you've just had the Image deal where it's all creator owned, how do you pitch people on, well, come and work for us now because we're going to own everything? And so then the calculation is, what can we do with these people that is, upfront? Look, we're going to own everything. And we're going to, at some point, you're not going to write the books or draw the books anymore. And that's just the way comics are. So we're going to be very upfront about that. Now, what is it going to take to make you put up with that?
Right.
And so, and so, and that came down to a bunch of people. We got a copy of DC's contracts through a guy named Mike Friedrich at Star Reach. And we knew what the DC deal was for character ownership, not character ownership, but character sharing, basically. And how they split income from licensing and merchandise with the creators. We had that. We had a couple of creator-owned comic contracts from Dark Horse. We had we had an IP attorney that we like to use a lot. And so Dave did a draft of a bunch of the agreements. A bunch of attorneys looked them over. A couple of creators we wanted to deal with had agents, and we had them look the contracts over. We knew Steve Gerber. We wanted him to be a part of it. We knew Gerber had a lot of problems with contracts over the years from his Howard the Duck days. So we wanted him to take a look at it and say, look, and basically open the door. It's like some of the points you bring up, we can't do because that's going to conflict with where we're going to go. But we'll try to address everything that we can and be upfront about it as we can. And that's where it's going to go. But the deal is going to be the deal. And so once we got the contracts in the shape, we started reaching out to creators.
Did you see it as sort of version 2.0 of Malibu at that point when this is all coming out? Like
Oh yeah.
a
No,
restart?
there's a clear demarcation where it's like, okay, this is where, I mean, we didn't say it out loud, but it's sort of like this is where the old Malibu Comics ends with the black and white creator-owned stuff, and this is where the new Malibu Comics of corporate ownership and corporate functionality is going to take over.
Were there
And we're
any?
not go ahead.
Oh, no, no, no. Please.
And we're not going to be as freewheeling as we used to be. We're going to be much more beholden to uh the numbers. Like we're not going to be able to say, "Oh, I like this book. I'm going to champion it. I'm going to put it on the schedule." And
Right.
now it's a lot more committees.
Were there any titles you looked at as cornerstone pieces that, okay, I really think we build on this. Like we have a lot of titles, but these might be our Superman, our Batman, our Wonder Woman, that, okay, we have this, let's build off of it.
No, because the thing is that there's a lot of books that we liked over the years. And Dave Obersch especially was great at this. He would come in and say, "This book is great. I really love this book. I think it's going to do well." And then the numbers would come in and it would just suck. And so, so we were never, and we would tease him about that endlessly. And so we sort of learned, like there's books that we liked, but we would never sort of go out on the limb and say like this is our hit, this is our thing, this is how this is it sets the stage for the future because in general we're just wrong.
Right. There's very cool things you guys did. As far as I guess gimmick covers, you would call it. You had the ferret cover, which was
Oh
his
yeah,
face and a cut around outline of it.
yes,
Then you had the protectors with the hole in the center where it looks like a
yes,
gunshot went through the guy.
yes.
Uh,
And then we killed the guy. We killed the guy in the comic.
yes.
So the bullet actually had a story purpose.
Um, whose idea was it to do those? And did you guys think, all right, is this going to be a risk?
No, because here's the here's the way our brains worked at the time, and there was a lot of it is groupthink. So it's me, it's Chris, it's Dave, it's Scott, and we're sort of it's hard to say who had what idea when because somebody will have had the germ of the idea and other people will have built on it, or somebody will have thrown out some idea that was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But then 3 weeks later, it's like, hey, wait a minute, can we go back to that stupid idea? We might want to do something with that. And so we learned to sort of throw everything into the pot. And also there's no recrimination. Like if you throw out a stupid idea,
Right.
it doesn't reflect badly on you because you're throwing stuff into the mix. It's all part of the pie. And so um we were always trying to do something new and cool that hadn't been done before. And could we make it work? And what we found out is after we had done a couple of things with our printer, our main printer, um, we would start to have conversations with the printer about, well, what do you do for what do you do for advertising agencies? What do you do for Nike? What do you print for these guys? Do you have foil paper? Do you have, whatever, some kind of weird card stock? And well, what kind of machines do you have? And I know when the bullet cover came out, the printer said, "Well, I we got a hole punch." So what do you mean like a hole punch? Like that little handheld thing that goes around in your office? No, no, no. It's like a drill press. You just it punches the hole right through things. And then I think it was Dave who had the call. Dave hangs up and runs over to us and said, "Hey, we can punch a hole in a comic book." And and so then it becomes, well, okay, let's do that,
Right.
but then let's figure out a way to at least make it do something, like not just punch a hole in the comic, but what can it be? It's like, well, then it becomes, well, we can get the artist to design the cover so it looks like the character got shot,
Mhm.
and then we have to sort of look at the pages in the story so that the bullet hole that goes through doesn't actually destroy story stuff,
Right.
which is almost impossible to do. And then we've got to talk to the writer and say, and I forget who called R.A. Jones. I think it was Chris Allman called R.A. Jones and said, "Hey, look, we have this machine that can put a hole in the comic book, and we'd like that to be a bullet hole. What can you do?" And R.A. suggested, "Well, I kill a guy."
Mhm.
And that way the bullet hole that goes to the comic is, yeah, it's a gimmick, but now it's a story point where it serves, there's some functionality to it that you can basically explain to people in a way that kind of makes sense. So it's like gimmick plus. And that process took several months to sort of work out because Ari had to write the script, the art had to get drawn, we had to figure out where the bullet hole was going to go, and then you have to solicit it. So
During this time, are you starting to think about your next move to move to television, or was
no,
that something? No.
no, I didn't think about that until Marvel bought us.
Okay.
I was still thinking because I still thought of, I mean, I don't know, have you met movie people? Because they would come up because I mean, we were close. And
Right.
so they would drive up and for some of them, it's like a field trip. Well, let's go see the comic book company. And so they would come up and they would wander around and they don't, I'm sure other people find this out too. They don't understand how comics get made. They don't understand the process. They don't understand what gets done first. They don't understand how long certain things take. They don't get any of it. They just see, they either see money or they don't. And so it's fun to sort of talk to them because you can sort of see if you get deeper into story, their eyes sort of glaze over. And if you try to address their concerns,
Mhm.
you're just sort of wasting your time because it doesn't matter. And so I didn't have any real desire to be into movies or TV shows at that time.
When Marvel did buy you guys, what was going through your mind at that point?
Which day? Because there's a timeline of my brain
Mhm.
where because
When you
I thought
first,
deep. Go ahead.
I was say when you first heard the rumblings of this.
Well, so it goes back to when DC was going to buy us.
Okay.
So at the time, Malibu Comics. I don't. I mean, I don't know how deep you want to go in. You can probably cut all this out. Um, but I'll ramble it anyway.
Sure.
So at the time at the launch of the Ultraverse, and when there was still the the video game component to the company, and that was still moving forward and still looked like a thing. And there was the toy line coming out, and there were the multiple trading cards, and there was the TV show, the animated feature or the animated series coming up, and the Nightman TV show. All that stuff was coming up. We took on an investor, a company called Worldwide Sports and Entertainment, which was a U.S. investment group that handled money for a Malaysian businessman called Ananda Christian, who just died like a month or so ago.
Mhm.
Um, and they pumped $5 million into the company because they sort of bought into this idea of the dream of the vertical integrated company. It was going to make comics, going to make video games, going to eventually make TVs and movies, and then we're just going to be, rich. Well, so that got mismanaged. um, and the computer, the interactive division of the company used up most of that investment money to buy like high-end computer equipment to make the video games and all that kind of stuff. So the money was sort of gone. And at the same time, the video game industry was crashing for like the umpteenth time. At the same time, the comic book industry was collapsing in that same year. Stores were going out of business, orders were being slashed right and left. And we had thought at some point the video game company could stand on its own, the comic company could stand on its own. And then we thought that we should get rid of the interactive company so the comic book company could survive, and that didn't work. And then it turned out that we were losing like $250,000 a month um, from the collapse of both industries. And so then the guys from WSE who operated out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, called us out to a meeting in Tulsa, which was like, you ever see the movie Office Space?
Yeah.
Where they're sitting around the conference table and they're all trying to justify their jobs. Like, well, what do you do here? So
Right.
there's this long sheet of employees that we had. We had like 150 employees at the time. And there's this long list of the employees, and they would go down well, what does he do? Well, what does she do? And this is, I mean, it's a tedious process. And if you've ever met me in person, one of the things I don't like to do is have a tedious process where I'm basically being yelled at and it's a boring meeting where I have to justify employee status because like I got comics to make. I don't have any time for this.
Right.
And so I'm not well behaved in those situations. And so and I think it was me, though it might have been Chris. We just turned to Scott and we said, we should tell him about the conversation we had with Paul Levitz. And because what had happened is that at WonderCon that year, Levitz had came over to Scott and Levitz said, a lot of, you know, fancy praise about Malibu's position, the Image deal, the Ultraverse deal, this, blah, blah, blah. And he ended the conversation by saying, if there's ever anything I can do for you, let me know.
Mhm.
And we obsessed about this conversation for weeks. It's like, well, what does that mean? What do you think that means? It's like the magic 8 ball. It's like, I don't know what that means. And so um, the WSE guys were like, what did Paul say? What's this Paul thing? Tell me about the Paul thing. It's like, well, Paul said we could call him if he wanted anything. And the WSE guys now saw their investment getting recouped. So they said, ask Paul if he wants to buy you. Just call him up and say, would you be interested in buying Malibu Comics? And so we went back to the office and Scott called him up and said, want to buy us? And Levitz was like, yeah, I'll buy you. And so that set the ball in motion for DC to buy Malibu for basically three separate reasons, according to Paul. One is it would establish DC as a West Coast presence. So maybe DC could stay in New York, and then Warner's would be happy having some portion of DC in an office on the West Coast. And he wanted us to do the kind of books that DC wasn't going to do because DC is locked into that DC Universe stuff,
Mhm.
and we were capable of doing stuff that was not DC Universe. And so for that summer, this would be the summer of '94, DC, well, Time Warner's or mergers and acquisitions people, the dark suited guys with the skinny ties and the
Mhm.
sunglasses would come out, and they would take things late at night after all the people had gone home. They would come into the office, they'd grab the files, and they'd run down to Burbank or whatever and sort through stuff, and they would put together an offer to buy the company. And we're sort of we're sort of floating pretty high at that time because it's like, oh, cool, DC's going to own us. DC's like this big company. It's owned by Time Warner. This is, this will get us over the hump and this will clear out all of our debts or whatever.
Right.
And so, but because the industry kept collapsing that summer, the price kept going down month to month to month as Time Warner was trying to find that magic number where we would accept it just before we went out of business. So there'd be like this, how close can we go? And so then word got out that we were up for sale and the DC might buy us. And that's when Marvel stepped in. And then Terry Stewart called Dave Olbrich and said, I heard you guys were up for sale. Is that true? And then that's where Marvel stepped in.
Emotionally, when you hear people you don't really know that well telling you guys maybe we should sell the DC, was that a gut punch, or at that point were you ready to say like, listen, it probably doesn't necessarily make sense to go a
Well,
different
here's the great thing is that this is again, maybe I'm the badly behaved one, is that I looked at it as, well, if we sell to DC, I'm going to get rid of these two guys. So that means the WSE guys are going to step away because they'll be bought out. So anything had to have been better. I mean, I've been dealing with those guys for like a year and a half.
Right.
Anything would have been better than dealing with them longer. So if we sold the company to DC, then I would feel like, okay, those guys are going to be gone. And
Right.
I knew the people at DC. I knew Bob Wayne. I knew Bruce Bristow. I knew Paul Levitz. I knew Lillian Laserson. I knew all of them.
Mhm.
So to me, it's like, well, these these are the devils that I know, and also they're comic book people. It's like I can talk to comic book people, and I'm willing to talk to comic book people. I'm not willing to talk to spreadsheet people.
Right. You, looking back, because you then worked on numerous children's shows, including one that my children love very much, which was Jim Henson's Pajanimals.
Or Janimals. Oh, that's a great show. I love that
Yes.
one.
um, could you have seen a career where television writing was what you did for a living, or did you need to do this with comics to get yourself in a mindset to do that as well?
Well, I didn't. So I grew up in a small town in Virginia, so I had no idea that any of this stuff was possible. I didn't have those dreams. I thought maybe I'll end up working at a car wash or something. No disrespect to car wash people, but that's, I didn't have these aspirational dreams of like, oh, I gotta work in movies. I have stories I want to tell and I need to get the word out to people. It's like I didn't have that. And
Right.
I fell into the TV stuff. Again, just sort of stumbling into it. Um, I had been when we were at when Malibu Comics was existing, I took a bunch of pitch meetings. Um, uh, well, a couple of things. I dealt with the 20th Century Fox people on the licensing stuff for Planet of the Apes and Alien Nation. I dealt with the Star Trek people at Paramount for Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I was friends with Howard Chaykin, so I was on the Paramount lot quite a bit to meet him for lunch because he was working as a writer producer on a couple of shows for Pet Fly Productions, and he had an office at the Paramount Studios. So I was really sort of familiar with that world already, and I'd been to a pitch meeting to pitch Rune to I can't remember her name. She was James Cameron's ex-wife, um,
Oh, okay.
the producer on Walking Dead now. Um, but I went. You can put it in the credits later. But I went to a pitch meeting with her, and I saw how pitch meetings work, and so I thought again, ignorance is my great driver. I thought, yeah, I could do this. This would be great. So I'll try to break into television. And so um, I went to the head of business affairs at Malibu Comics, a guy named Michael Yanover, and I said, I want to break into TV. How do I do that?
Mhm.
And he said, well, I know an agent. I'll hook you up. So, and again, people try for years and years. I got to get an agent. I got to meet an agent. How do I get my material in front of an agent? How do I get an agent to sign me? It's like I walked into a guy's office that I knew that I was friends with, and he said, I know a guy. So he set me up with the guy who was an agent. He the agent met me and signed me as a client like that day. So it's not because I had a track record at Malibu Comics. I'd written comics. I technically in some way I'm an Ultraverse creator. Technically in some way I'm the founder of Malibu Comics. So technically I can be all these things. And he saw that why he saw a way that he could pitch me to clients that would get meetings that wouldn't embarrass him. So it wasn't I had like a magic resume
Right.
where and that's sort of what got me in the door. So now without even trying, I now had an agent. And now I was taking meetings.
Right.
So I was meeting the producers of The Simpsons. I was meeting the guys at Deke. I was meeting the guys at Mike Young Productions. I was meeting guys at Nickelodeon. I was meeting people at Klasky Chupo,
Mhm.
and I just walked into it. So it's not again. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or break anybody's heart, but the luckiest kid in town.
Well, for you, what's the key to writing a program for children that doesn't go over their heads, but at the same time you know, it doesn't go beneath them as well?
Right. So it's it's fun. It's funny that way because there are a lot of people making a show.
Mhm.
And like for kids, there are to make a show for kids, especially an educational show, you get so there's the network people, there's the broadcasting people, there's the syndicator, if that still exists. There's an educational consultant or two that has to weigh in on issues, and then they can sort of keep you from that. So you're presented at every opportunity, you're presented with challenges that you have to sort of overcome and address. And the fun part is to figure out how can I do that without being pedantic?
Right.
It's like, I remember the shows where I was like Captain Planet or whatever, where it's like, okay, children, now throw your trash in the trash can. It's like, well, I don't want to write that stuff. I want, I don't mind teaching people about recycling, but I got to find a way that's, well, here's your trash can, Jimmy, and here's our wadded up piece of paper. What should we do with it? Oh, I don't know. It's like, well, I don't want to do that. And
Right.
so, I've been fortunate enough to get hired to work on shows where there's some leeway in how you can present the material. Um, and I, you may find this incredible to believe, but I'm the kind of person who would push a boundary
Really?
and then I know it's hard. It's hard to believe and want to be pulled back. Like I don't really accept I accept the fact that it's for kids and I accept the fact that there are rules and regulations and I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. But I will push the limits of what can be done and I will try to figure out a weaselly clever way to say the same thing without preaching to kids because I have kids
Right.
and when they were younger, I could tell when they would tune out to stuff that was preachy and what got them excited. And it's like, okay, that's my audience. I know exactly where my kids' personal limits are, and I realize that's anecdotal and not actual data, but I'm going to try to achieve that. And so that's where I am. And also, I'm really good at not being angry about notes.
Okay.
It's like, oh, it's like I accept the fact that there are 6, 7, 8, 10 people who are going to weigh in on my script. And
Mhm.
it's not my script, it's the show's script. So it's not my ego isn't a my ego is attached to the problem solving. My ego is not attached necessarily to the writing.
That makes sense. If for some reason in a different world, if you had just stayed doing Dinosaurs for Hire, had a long run on it,
Oh
still
yeah.
working to this day, would you have been content in your life, or did you
No.
need to grow and do all these different things?
No, it turns out I need constant stimulation of new things. I'm like I have I don't I know it's fashionable now to say that you have some kind of mental health issue that drives you and keeps you from settling down, but I can't stay in one place. Like I've got to be because I still do different stuff. I did a couple of corporate gigs last month where I wrote press releases for a
Right.
guy I knew because they needed them. And I've done advertising work and I did some YouTube video stuff where it's like you won't believe how Johnny got his new job. And you write, it's mostly for an Asian market to explain sort of US customs to an Asian audience. And so it's very far away from comics. It's very far away from what I thought I would be doing, but I found the work fascinating because I'm writing for a different audience and I'm writing with a different intent. And it's like that keeps everything fresh. Like I don't know how guys who write uh like pick a famous book series, the Reacher novels.
Right.
Like I don't know how he can write just the Reacher novels every year. Like I mean, I envy that success and I envy that skill. I don't have that skill. I would write like one Jack Reacher novel and then I'd be like, I gotta write a cartoon about a talking duck now. And it's like I've got to constantly engage my brain in different stuff.
I just want to add one more comic related question because you mentioned Star Trek when you
Yeah.
had the license for that. When you have a license for a brand that big, are there a
Yes.
lot of cooks in the kitchen on you guys as to the way people looked in the comics, which way the comic was going, the tone?
Yeah. So here's the fun thing about that is that because I'd worked on Robotech comics before
Mhm.
and I'd worked on the Planet of the Apes comics before, so I sort of knew what the Paramount people would say on the Star Trek comic, and I knew from people who worked on the DC Star Trek comics that there's a and again, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not. It sounds great to me, so I'm going to say it's true, even though it may not be. Is that in when Patrick Stewart renegotiated his contract for Next Generation because they're signed for 5 years, but the show ran for like 7 or 8 or whatever. So they renegotiated at some point, and what he wanted was licensing approval over his image because he found out that some people in the licensing world were making his bald head a little too pointy, and it made it so he wanted to have pointy approval,
Right.
and so I knew there's a stickler for that.
Mhm.
And I knew that that's a possibility with any other actor because, again, if it was your image, you'd be the same way. It's like my nose doesn't look that way, my ears don't look that way. Don't make my chin look that way. It's like so I understand it completely. And so what you try to do is I again because being in comics so a while before that, I knew artists who could deliver.
Mhm.
So you got to find the artists that can deliver, um, and you have to give one of the things that we did with the Paramount license, first of all, is that um, I was the launch editor. I was never going to stay with it, but I was the launch editor, and Paramount understood that again, technically, I'm one of the founders of the company, and it's like, ooh, the license is so important. Look, we put one of the founders of the company on it, and so there was an immediate thing where I'm not just the editor of the comic; it's the founder of the company or the co-founder of the company.
Mhm.
So that's how important we take this. And so now I had some sort of elevated status in the room because look, the co-founder's here, and so that gave me some leeway. And then I have a very specific attitude about licensed comics, which may be to my detriment or maybe to my benefit, which is I'll take pitches. I would go out to the Star Trek writers that I wanted to use on the comic, and I would say, well, here's the deal. You can pitch me any crazy idea you want, and if I like it, I'll send it to Paramount. If they reject it and just say they don't want to do it, that idea is dead. I'm not going to fight for it because that's there's no win there. They own it. If they say they don't want to do it, I don't win by fighting. So I'm not going to. So writer, I'm not going to fight for you. Your idea, I will, but I will continue to take pitches from you, and continue to move the ball forward. And so I don't let the licensing antagonize me. I mean, I'm not going to let them sort of dictate all the stories. I would like the writers to come up with stories that they want to do, but I also want Paramount to approve the stories because we're going to run with the license for 3 years or whatever. So I don't want to be constantly fighting.
Makes sense. Where can folks find you? Where can folks see what you're up to?
Oh my God. So you can find me I'm on Facebook.
Mhm.
I'm gonna be on Blue Sky in a couple weeks. Once I figure out how to, once I get a couple of teenage kids to put up my page for me.
The high school kid.
Um, yeah, high school. I need a smart high school kid. I need the guy in the chair to come in
Yeah.
and run my stuff. Um, and I'm a sidekick on Silverline Comics Sunday podcast, which is the Silverline Comics on YouTube. People can find that out there. And I talk much about this same kind of stuff. Um, and I make fun of things. Um,
There you go.
And then I think that's it. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Instagram. I'm
Okay.
not. I go to the San Diego Comic Con every year. Um, and you can see my books in bookstores, and I got a comic book coming out in 2025.
Oh,
I got another one coming out in 2026. So I'm still, again, part of that short attention span thing. I'm back doing comics again, in addition to all the other stuff.
and I just also like to plug, because JC Vaughn's such a nice guy, the latest edition of Lost Universe,
Oh yeah.
Gemstone, has a very nice interview with you talking about Dinosaurs for Hire. So if people are
Yes.
interested, that's another resource to learn more about it.
Yeah, that was a fun interview. We did that over a period of a couple of months,
Mm,
back and forth on email, and we're trying to make it casual and fun.
yeah,
So there's a lot of good dirt in that.
most definitely. And we're back. That was really interesting when he was talking about Image and the deal they struck with them. It's sort of helped both parties kind of get a foot in the door and stuff like that. And you know, Dinosaurs for Hire when you hit the home run right out of the ballpark in your first swing, it's pretty darn good. So Tom, thank you so much for being on the show. We'd love to have you back. Talk some more about your time in the industry. And guys, we'd love to have you back. So come back next week. Big, big, big shows next week. You're going to really enjoy it and have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you then.